Hello everyone, welcome to Tripp Advisor. Happy Friday everyone. It's time for another Film Friday episode here at Tripp Advisor. Today's something a little different. I won't be doing a film review today, but I recently had the pleasure of having a conversation with my friend Erik in Calgary, Alberta. He runs an excellent podcast there called the Inception of Wonder, and he reached out to me and we had a lengthy and enjoyable conversation about a bunch of different topics, specifically movies for the season of Lent. I'll be running some film viewing parties and discussion groups here for those watching specific movies throughout the season of Lent the next couple of months. So I wanted to share our conversation that we had recently. So here's my conversation with my friend Erik, host of the Inception of Wonder. Enjoy.
Welcome to the Inception of Wonder, Jason Tripp. I'm excited to have you on the show. I know we've chatted a bit over New Leaf Network in the community there, but also I know you from your YouTube channel, and I understand you are a pastor in Valley View Church in, help me if I say this right, Blizzard, Ontario.
Well, the running joke is we call it Blizzard Valley in the winter, but it's actually Blizzard Valley, Blezard, which you won't really find on the map, but it's part of the greater Sudbury area. So I just tell people we're kind of in Sudbury, about 4 hours north of Toronto. So yeah, I pastor a Free Methodist church here. Been doing that for a little over a decade. And yeah, just dipping my toes into the world of YouTube lately. Not exactly getting in on the ground floor, I know, with that, but just feeling a little bit restless during COVID, feeling the need to create something. And so started a YouTube channel a little while ago. But yeah, I've been enjoying our times sort of rubbing shoulders virtually at New Leaf. And that's been a great opportunity just to connect and just hear some stories of what's happening across our country, including the Inception of Wonder. That's how I got into your podcast. So appreciate the invitation, and I've been enjoying some of your content at your end.
That's awesome. Well, I'm excited you're here. Tell us a bit about your history. Have you always been in Ontario, or?
Yeah, so I was, ironically, I was born and raised in Sudbury and grew up here and really couldn't wait to leave. So I grew up, actually stuck around, did some university here at Laurentian University, which sadly has been in the news for all difficult reasons lately. But after finishing my business degree here, I decided to go to South Korea and teach English as a second language. So I lived in Southeast Asia for 2 years. And that was a very sort of transformative time in my life. It was an eye-opening time to live cross-culturally. And it was also a time where I felt sort of this stirring or tugging on my heartstrings, or calling, as you might say it in some Christian circles, to pursue ministry vocationally. And so I wrestled with that for a while, resisted that adamantly for a while, but God is gentle but persistent, and came back, got married, and did some seminary training down in Southern Ontario, lived in Kingston for a year, went to Queens for a year, and then over to Tyndale Seminary in Southern Ontario. And just as I was wrapping up my Master's of Divinity degree there, my wife and I, we got pregnant with our first of 2 children, and then we figured it might be a good time to move back to Sudbury, where our family were, and the rest is history. We're in Sudbury now, and I've been pastoring the church here since we returned. So that's the long and short of it in a nutshell.
Yes. I bet it was transformative being in Korea there. So I've always desired to go over into Japan area. And if I was not in a wheelchair, I probably would have took the opportunity to do some adventures there and experience that too. But I am actually from Hamilton, Ontario. I was born in Hamilton, but my family very quickly moved out west here to Alberta. So predominantly, I've been out in the West here for most of my life. And I have to say that although my family is very much a Cat fans, I am a very strong Stampeder fan.
Yeah.
So
I'm not a very good Canadian. I'm more of an NFL guy than CFL. So I apologize for that. But if I lived in Calgary, that probably wouldn't be the case. Yeah.
You mentioned your YouTube channel. I know you have some great videos there where you discuss Tabletop Tuesdays, as well as Theology Thursdays and Friday Films. So tell us a bit about your YouTube channel and what it's about and how you come up with these awesome adventures.
Yeah, well, I've always been someone who gets restless when I'm not creating something or trying to pioneer something with others. And certainly during this season of COVID for the last year, was just feeling kind of restless. And in those seasons, I've learned to be self-aware that maybe those are opportunities just to kind of sit with that restlessness. And that can be the sort of the soil from which something can grow, something new and something beautiful, hopefully. And as I'm feeling restless, I'm observing my son, who's 10 years old. And truth be told, some days he spends more time with some YouTubers. He's a big video gamer. So he's on his gaming YouTube channels more than he's with his dad some days, which I lament. But hey, he's a 10-year-old. He loves gaming. And we do that together sometimes. And I'm watching these YouTubers. And to be honest, they're mildly annoying. Some of them are rather obnoxious. Some of them are just boys that never grew up. And I'm thinking, okay, I don't want to be like those guys. But at the same time, you know, the light bulb kind of went on and said, well, maybe I've got something that I can share, hopefully less obnoxiously. And I just had this idea of, as our family and many other families aren't able to travel anywhere, the light bulb just went on and I just got the title Tripp Advisor. Now there's no copyright infringement there because my last name is Tripp with 2 P's. So I thought, Tripp Advisor, what a neat sort of title for a YouTube channel where I can release some content about not a singular passion, but sort of 3 different passions in my life. And going right back to my childhood, 3 of my biggest passions, aside from the one we've already talked about, which is sports, could do sports Saturdays, I guess, but that'd be too much, is tabletop gaming. As a family growing up, that was our thing. After dinner, we would pull out a game, and anything around a table to this day is sacred for me, whether it's sharing a meal or playing a board game. Those are sacred times. So I have fond memories, past and present, with tabletop board gaming. And obviously I'm a pastor who loves to talk to people about theology, and particularly those who might be deconstructing their faith and reconstructing sort of a healthy faith formation and theological worldview. And then films, and I know that's a passion we both share. I want to talk about a little more today. Is I've always had a love of movies, even though I grew up in a pretty staunch conservative Christian household. For some strange reason, movies weren't out of bounds, and I'm glad they weren't, because films have always been an art form that have resonated with me deeply. So I thought, you know, why don't roll out 3 videos a week: a Tabletop Tuesday board game review, some sort of theological topic for discussion and conversation on Thursday, and then some topics related to films on Friday. And it's a lot of work. I didn't really know what I bargained for, but I'm enjoying it. My wife is supportive, but she kind of shakes her head and says, Jason, you're biting off more than you can chew again. But yeah, so the channel is called Tripp Advisor, and it's about those 3 topics. So if anyone's interested in one or all of those topics, I'd love to get your feedback.
That is very cool. Yeah, I know the feeling. My wife and my friends all talk about the fact that they cannot go to a movie with me without me having to open it into this profound, deep discovery of truth within Star Wars or or some other movie. So, yeah.
I was actually just putting together my sort of schedule for the next few months for the channel and trying to slot in what I want to talk about games. I was thinking, what day of the week is May the 4th? May the 4th be with you, right? And sure enough, it's on a Tuesday, and I've got a Star Wars board game already queued up for that day. So
that is awesome. Yeah. Yeah. One of my favorites. That and Star Trek. That's another one. My wife does not like sci-fi, so she bears through it with me, but I love those. So
yeah, I love sci-fi too. My most recent film review was Ad Astra, one of my favorite sci-fi movies, which has some profound theological things to say as well. So yeah. So basically, the YouTube channel, and it's just a means of sharing what has brought me joy, and hopefully it can connect with others and sort of incite some newfound joy and passion in one of those 3 areas, or all of them, with others.
That's great. So we're coming up to the season of Lent. And I know you started to pull this group together that's going to be looking at movies for Lent.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm kind of excited to dive into those conversations. I'd love to get in on some of those conversations with you. But can you tell us a bit about Movies for Lent, what your vision is for it, and kind of the movies that you're pulling together for discussion?
Yeah, well, maybe before we talk about movies for Lent, let's just back the truck up a bit and talk about what is Lent, just so everybody's on the same page. I grew
Sure.
up in an evangelical tradition, and I wasn't really familiar with sort of the church calendar and the rhythms up until about a decade ago. I started to take that seriously. And so Lent is the season we're approaching. We're actually recording this on a Tuesday, and tomorrow will be Ash Wednesday, which sort of kicks off the 7 weeks leading into Easter. And it's really is synonymous with a time of slowing down. It's a time of introspection. It's a time of being honest about our vulnerabilities, our frailties, our mortality, and some of the disorientation and trauma that is part of the human journey. It almost seems like maybe for some of us, we've been in a season of Lent for a year already, I know, with COVID going on. But it's become a very meaningful time for me, a time just to slow down, a time to be very introspective, a time to be vulnerable and honest about some of my own frailties, faults, flaws, mortality. And so the Movies for Lent idea, and I've watched movies my whole life at different times of the year, but I've never done usually you give up something for Lent, right? That's the tradition. I'm giving up chocolate, or I'm giving up this or that. I'm definitely not going to give up movies for Lent. I'm going to do the opposite. I'm going to intentionally pick up movies that help me with my own reflection and making this season more meaningful, which means the movies we're going to be viewing and discussing for the next 7 weeks are not going to be the most maybe lighthearted, joy-filled movies, although there are moments of joy, certainly. But they're movies that are raw. They're movies that sort of are visceral, some of them. They're movies that sort of intersect, they're at the intersection of faith and doubt and sort of helping us wrestle through. And I thought, I could do this on my own, but I'd much rather create sort of a virtual space, a virtual table where if anybody wants to, we can watch the films on a weekly basis and then have just a weekly open discussion like we're doing now. What spoke to you in this movie? What part of the movie resonated with you? How does it connect with your life and your story and your journey and the journey of Lent in which we're in? So that really is sort of the vision and the passion for it. And my hope was not to have a huge group of people, because sometimes less is more in this case. And so even if some of people listening to this are intrigued by that idea, yeah, you could join the group, but I'd say start your own group. Start with people you're already on the journey with. I mean, add this to your rhythm in the next couple of months, and hopefully it'll bear fruit and it'll sort of add value to the conversations and the journey. So that's kind of the impetus behind it.
Yeah, backing up a bit again to that understanding of Lent, I think it's important to notice that Lent is not necessarily supposed to be this morbid or depressive type experience and practice. It's this sense of going deeper in, and it's not just deeper into the individual, not just deeper into your own personal spiritual identity and search, but also going deeper into your relationships with your significant others, with your neighbors, with your community. And I think one of the ways that we do that is very much through storytelling. I think that, stories are what really take us into a reflective experience of what's really going on in our lives and the relationships we have. So movies, very naturally in a North American context particularly, I think do that in a very natural way. They draw us into a reflective experience if we're willing to pay attention and allow it to take us there. So
well, that was a big part of Jesus' ministry, right? He was the master storyteller. I mean, he wouldn't just give bullet points of truth. He would share truths of his kingdom within a story that would resonate with the listeners of his time. And what do movies do? They tell stories that at the best of times will resonate and connect with us in our journeys and our stories as well.
Yeah. I know some of the great experiences we had as a house church was when we'd have our God at the movie nights. And we'd
Nice.
actually every month have a movie night where we would watch a film and then discuss afterwards our experiences and encounters with God and truth in the story. So
Yeah, and so what we decided to do, we have something in our denomination that we call Life Plan. And it's really kind of every 2 to 3 years we just we stop and reflect on the life of our faith community and the surrounding community, and we kind of listen and discuss what is the Spirit sort of putting on our heart to birth or put more emphasis in or to prune back. And so a few years ago, well, almost, I guess a decade ago now, we got this idea just to start a movie theater for the community. So for the last 10 years, we've run a community drive-in movie theater in the summer. So every Friday night, we'll just invite people from the community to come. And that's been wonderful to see. Just, it's nice to see people our age. I think we're the same age. You were born in 78, right?
Yeah.
So we're both born in 78. So I don't know about you, but I have some of my earliest childhood movie memories were actually going to an old drive-in theater here.
Oh,
and so to see people, yeah. So I don't know if you have any of those in Calgary to this day, but you see some people rolling in our age and they're so excited because they're telling their kids, when I was your age, we went to a drive-in like this. And so to see the inception of wonder in the life of those families that show up at the movies has been a joy. And we whether it's Disney movies or other family friendly movies, they incite some good conversations as well. So yeah, so whether it's God at the movies or drive-in theater, I mean, movies are a big part of our lives and our faith communities.
I actually remember a drive-in theater. We still had to roll the window down and have the speaker on the.
Oh, really? Yeah. That's how it was, right? It was right there. Yeah.
That's awesome. So what are some of the movies that you're going to be focusing on through movies in Lent?
Yeah. So I made a list of them here. It was difficult to strip it down to 7. There's a lot of movies that would have fit the bill, but yeah, so the first one we're rolling out is one you may be familiar with, or others will be. It's called Children of Men. It's in 2006. It's sort of a post-apocalyptic film starring Clive Owen, which is one of my favorites of the decade. And then the second week, we're looking at a film called First Reformed with one of my favorite actors, Ethan Hawke, and he plays a pastor in a rural community who's really going through his own sort of dark night of the soul experience. That's from 2017. And then the third week, we're going back. This will be a first viewing for me. I wanted to sprinkle in some older sort of classic films with similar themes as well. So there's a film from 1955. I keep hearing about it. I've never seen it. It's called Ordette. And it's a Danish film. It's about a Danish farmer who has 3 sons, and each of the sons has sort of divergent, differing religious beliefs. And so it's sort of the conversations and navigating some of those family dynamics. I thought it would be an interesting theme to include. And then we're coming back to more modern film in week 4, the film called Calvary, starring Brendan Gleeson. And he plays a good-hearted priest who he's wrestling with some of the cynical or spiteful people in his community after he actually receives a death threat from a parishioner. I can't fully relate to that. I haven't received any death threats from my parishioners yet. Hopefully not. So that'll be in week 4. And then in week 5, we've got the film called Andrei Rublev, which is, have you heard of that one or seen that one, Eric? It's from 1966. And it's Andrei Tarkovsky. Yeah, acclaimed director Andrei Tarkovsky. And it follows the life of an iconic painter set in the 15th century in Russia during a great time of turmoil, and how he's an artist, someone who wants to create beauty, but he's surrounding with so much darkness and so much evil that it's pretty difficult for him. And he actually takes a vow of silence throughout the film for part of it. It's been deemed sort of the greatest art house film of all time by some. And then I know the one you're excited for, because you mentioned you have seen it, is the movie Silence. Martin Scorsese, wonderful director that I'm sure most have heard of. I think this is one of many of his masterpieces. It's probably my favorite Scorsese film. And it's based on a novel by Shusaku Endo, a Japanese novelist, about 2 Jesuit Catholic priests who traveled to Japan in search of a fellow priest during the 17th century. And that also explores and wrestles with faith and doubt and the perceived silence of God, and going deeper in your faith, even in the midst of trauma. Powerful film, a difficult film to watch at times, but one that I felt very powerful as well. So those are some of the films that we'll be walking through during the season of Lent, and I'm looking forward to having the conversations.
You have one more after Silence, don't you?
Oh yeah, I do. I didn't write that one down. Do you have it in front of you? I don't even remember what it was. Oh yes, of course. Winter Light is the last one. Winter Light. That's a famous film as well. That's one of the films that inspired the movie First Reformed. And so it's an older film as well that I've seen once before and want to revisit. Watched it a while back, but so yeah, those are the 7, and I think there'll be some overlap in the themes of them, but I think each of them, independent of the others, will all help us navigate, not into, like you say, it's not about being morbid or depressive, but it really takes a long, hard look into the reality of the ups and the downs of life and faith. That life is not always one big high. We're coming out of the season of Epiphany, and now we're going into the season of Lent. So we want to be honest and sort of real about the challenging times of life, those dark nights of the soul, which, as you said, can help us if we travel through them healthily and communally, can actually mature us as individuals.
Yeah. I was reflecting on some of those movies because I've seen some of them. I haven't seen all of them. I'd like to see Calvary. I checked that one out. I think that looks phenomenal. I know the actor there too has been in quite a few other films.
Yeah, he's a great actor. Yeah.
So
you've seen Silence. Have you seen First Reformed with Ethan Hawke?
It looks partly familiar to me, but I'd probably have to review it. I don't really remember it that well. I know I've seen a lot of Ethan Hawke films too. I am curious about your thoughts on Children of Men, because I was curious, how is that fitting into a Lent theme? Now, I know, touching on it, Clive Owen, I think that is actually one of his first North American, at least, starring roles. I just before that was him and Matt Damon in the Bourne Identity. Mm-hmm. That was kind of Clive Owen's appearance in North America, I think.
Right.
And soon after that came Children of Men. So what's kind of the Lent voice in Children for Men?
So I actually could have chosen that one for Advent, and maybe it fits better with Advent, to be honest. That film struck me very powerfully in a number of ways. And if you watch it very clearly, probably more than any other movie on this list, and maybe more than any other movie I've seen in recent menu, there's so much iconography in it. There's so many symbols, philosophical and religious symbols littered throughout the movie. Some of them subtle, some of them more up in your face, in this world that is created, this post-apocalyptic world where hope is a resource that is running on empty. And, sometimes I think it connects because in our world today, maybe more this Lent than ever before, the world at large, I feel like hope isn't exactly in large quantity. I remember, I know when people were celebrating Happy New Year, 2020 is over. Yeah, like 2021 is just going to be peachy, right? And well, things are sort of carrying on, and the world is still sort of groaning as we go through this pandemic. And so a movie like that sort of dovetails in some regard to what we're going through in our world today. And yet, I don't want to spoil the movie for those who haven't seen it, but the overarching premise is that in that world, people aren't able to have children. Women haven't had children for years. And so eventually they feel like their world is coming to an end. So they're going through this very dark night of the soul. But then there is a glimmer of hope as they find out that this woman has been able to have a child. And so for me, it really speaks of navigating as a community, because there's a community of people who are sort of resisting. They're determined to push through some of the trauma and the darkness in their society, and they're banding together to push through. And when they discover this glimmer of hope, they're turning their whole life has been devoted to pursuing that hope, not only for them, but spilling over into the life of the world as well. So I think it cuts to some of the themes of the gospel and of Lent as well. And there's one scene in particular that is one of my favorite scenes in all of cinema, where these warring factions, they're pummeling a building, and they're housing this girl who has this child. They've discovered this baby, and then all of a sudden they bring the baby out, and the war just stops. There's just silence. Everybody's in awe at the cry of a baby. Hence, it might be a good Advent theme as well. And I've just spoiled the best part of the movie. So, but yeah, I think it does connect in some ways, and surprisingly so. Because on the surface, yeah, it might seem like the one that doesn't fit as much of the others, but I don't think it's a stretch to say there are a lot of themes that dovetail with our world today and with the season of Lent.
Yeah. We'll have to put a spoiler alert on our publication.
Yeah, feel free to cut that part out, or spoiler alert. Yeah.
I love that you brought up the fact that there were these icons that appeared throughout Children of Men. I'm going to watch it again to try and watch for those icons. Last year, it was icons that really spoke to me when I went on this tour around Calgary that was looking at the different ethnic icons in different churches, the Eastern Orthodox Catholic Church, the South African Church, and so on. And I remember writing a piece on it on my blog that you can find at the inceptionofwonder.com. And I talked about the fact of how growing up in the Anglican church and going to a Catholic school when I was young, I didn't necessarily appreciate or understand the significance of icons and of the depictions of Jesus and of the biblical narratives that were around me. But as I experienced them in my adulthood in this tour and in these profoundly traditional iconography depictions, I felt this deep sense of recognizing that we're to be putting on the image of God. That's what, the Imago Dei is about, is recognizing that we are to bring out the flesh and blood, the physicality and the actual physical presence of God amongst us. And that's what these icons are trying to depict to us, which was profound.
Yeah. I mean, and, going through church history, we see the worst of the church when they're pulling a scripture out of context. Thou shalt not have any graven images, right? And the whole total church is being destroyed and all the icons being burned, when in reality, as you stated, right, Jesus is the visible image of the invisible God, and by extension we have been created in God's image and likeness. So icons for me, again, weren't a big part of my life. It was a few years ago when I was on sabbatical. We took a summer trip to Europe, and just venturing through all these cathedrals, like thousands of years old, some of them, and going to like places like Assisi, Italy, and the chapel where St. Francis Assisi had his divine encounter. And some of these sort of sacred moments was just really eye-opening. And there was some profound impact and some sort of mystical experiences. Even my wife and I experienced as we were sitting in these places, and it kind of opened my eyes to the value of iconography, not to worship them, but that they are sort of a conduit of God's love and grace. And just as we're trying to create beauty with our podcast, how many people before us were trying to create beauty before the age of technology and YouTube, right? What did they do? They made icons and they built beautiful cathedrals, right? So it does sort of connect with what we're doing today in a different time, a different place.
Yeah. And funny enough, it seems like there's so many post-apocalyptic films that seem to do that, to reveal this deep religious presence throughout and story throughout their experiences, this band of community that's trying to make it through this life, and yet they're finding deep connections with one another as well as with a story that's bigger than them. So I love that. I gotta do a shout out here to one of my favorite post-apocalyptic movies, of Book of Eli.
Yeah, that's another good one as well.
Deep iconography in that film too. And I love those stories. Every time I hear there's a new one out,
Yeah.
I'm excited.
We won't spoil the end of Book of Eli. That's a major spoiler.
Did you see it coming?
The operative word is see, right? Yeah.
Oh, you blew it. Oh, that's great. So you also, you mentioned Silence is one of my favorites too.
Yeah, let's talk about Silence. What particular about that movie resonated with you? Because it deeply resonated with me, but I'd love to hear your experiences with Silence.
Yeah, well, I got to tell you, Scorsese actually deeply impacted me through a film that he did almost back in the late 70s, I believe, early 80s, that I was surprised I'm not sure if you're familiar with it, The Mission with Robert De Niro.
That was on my short list as well. Yeah.
Yeah, that was a Scorsese too. And that was hugely impacting on me when it comes to the influence of the church and the significance of what it means to be in God's mission, as opposed to being this colonial power that's hugely committing grotesque crimes against local indigenous people. So it was powerful. And I think Silence, he taps into some of that too, profoundly, in the Japanese culture instead of the South American culture. He was tapping into kind of the Japanese history of their relationship with the church, and particularly the Catholic Church.
Yeah, it explores some themes that actually we've been exploring, some of us at the New Leaf Network, on colonization and decolonization, and really step back and take a long, hard look at some of the missionary endeavors, the good, the bad, and the ugly of our missionary endeavors historically and currently in the world. Scorsese, I like how Scorsese, he's not preachy in the movie. He just sort of lays these big themes out there. I don't think he has a hidden agenda per se, or if he does, his biases aren't showing overtly. But he throws these big concepts in front of you and says, here they are, take them, chew on them, discuss them, which are good ingredients for like a Movies for Lent movie.
I think his hidden agenda was saying that Liam Neeson was a starring role.
That was his bait and switch, eh? Yeah, that's a great cast.
Yeah, and I love the deep, profound question of apostatizing in there. I wrote that blog piece on it, and I focused a lot on that. What does it mean to step on your Jesus? And the sense of, when is it that we should allow ourselves, speaking of Lent and the sense of giving up in that sense, is when is it right to step on your Jesus, to take up something deeper, to take up something more profound, more significant, more deeply enriched by the presence of what it means to follow the Christ.
Yeah. And when would Jesus even say, go ahead, trample on me, right? For the sake of something deeper, for the sake of loving others. That was the challenge in that film, right? If you could save lives by trampling on your picture of Jesus, is that ethical to do? So it probes some of those questions very deeply, and I'm looking forward to that conversation. Maybe you can join us for that one.
I hope to. I would love to. Yeah, that would be very cool. So you mentioned some runner-up films. What were some of the runner-ups for you?
Yeah, well, you mentioned The Mission. That was on my short list here, ironically. I toyed with the idea of doing some of the direct sort of passion narratives. I mean, speaking of Scorsese, The Last Temptation of Christ was another one. The Passion of the Christ. That one's a little too maybe visceral and raw for some, so I took that off. I don't know if you've seen a recent movie called Mother by Darren Aronofsky. No, Javier Bardem is in it. It's pretty raw, and it can be violent in scenes, but it really is a gigantic biblical parable. of going right back to the Garden of Eden, the first man, the first woman, and how temptation sort of infiltrated the garden in a modern sort of retelling. It's quite fascinating, but it's not for everyone. And I wanted to have movies that were real and raw to a certain degree, even Silence. I mean, I hosted a screening and a Q&A in our local movie theater of Silence when it first came out, and half the audience loved it, half the audience were ready to leave, I think, halfway through, because they're not films for everyone. But I think, at least with films like Silence, I think all of these films at least deserve to be seen once. Let me just put it that way. And if you revisit them, that's up to you. But I think these are films that are all masterpieces and classics in the truest sense of the word. And I think they need to be viewed at least once in your lifetime. So, but yeah, those are some of the others on the short list. And who knows, maybe we'll have a part 2 next year, and we'll get back to some of those films.
Yeah. I know I sent you a message about it and was curious too. You said it was on your short list, was the movie To End All Wars with Kiefer Sutherland.
Yes. Yeah. That was a tough one to watch too. I remember bawling my eyes out after watching that movie. It was, that one hit me hard.
Yeah. I think every time I've seen it, I've had to have the Kleenex nearby, because that one scene when that guy's crucified on the cross, I'm giving away part of a significant scene, but man, that was powerful stuff. So
yeah, certainly this isn't an exhaustive or exclusive list. There are a lot of films that could have been there, but I figured once a week would be enough for 7 weeks. And but maybe those listening too, I'd love to hear your feedback. What are some other movies that would sort of fit the bill for a season of Lent? And maybe there's some others that we're overlooking.
A couple that would make my list would probably actually be Mel Gibson's The Passion. I know we mentioned earlier, there's a lot of controversy around the film.
Yeah.
I know there's questions of anti-Semitism and other situations that come out of that. But for me, the images of Christ and what he went through, what Jesus went through the trial, through the whipping, through being crucified. I actually did a major paper study on the medical reasons for his death and went through all that stuff. And that film very accurately depicts.
Yeah. The realism is just, it's profound, but again, a film I think everyone should watch once. I know many will not want to revisit it, but it's a powerful film as well. And the one I should mention, actually one of the ones I really wanted to have, I just couldn't put it on the list because you can't find it anywhere. It's an old film from 1951 called Diary of a Country Priest. And it was probably the biggest influence on First Reformed, which very much echoes it. But it's just a priest keeping a diary over a period of time about his trials and challenges in that time in his ministry, by a famous French director called Robert Bresson. That's going back to the early 50s. But so I really wanted to have different eras represented in this too. I mean, I love contemporary films, but there are some classics from the 50s and 60s that just a reminder that our generation is not the only generation wrestling with and going through some of the questions that we're going through right now. So,
yeah. And I think another one that I would probably put on the list out of, I guess, a bit of a sentimentality is, as when I was young, of course there was always bedtime, right? You got to go to bed. But during the Lent and Easter time, there would always put Charlton Heston's The 10 Commandments on TV. Yep. And it was,
or Ben-Hur is another one.
Yeah. It was my one night that I was allowed to stay up past bedtime and watch
the 10 Commandments. Yeah. It was Ben-Hur was the one in our family. So every Easter, that would be an Easter tradition. On Easter weekend, we would watch Ben-Hur. And that was something for years. And 10 Commandments also from time to time. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think it creates almost that, we don't often think of it this way, but that cross-cultural connection with the Jewish storyline, the idea of Passover and what their tradition and narrative is for Passover. So I think, that would definitely be on my list too, to talk about Moses and the Exodus. So
So it sounds like you're going to start your own up. You could pick. I want to see you're going to start your own group up with the mission and 10 Commandments. We should come back and talk in a couple of months about how it went for both of us.
Well, maybe next year.
Next year, yeah. I'll tag you're it next year.
Sounds good. Well, so yeah, you mentioned about Advent. Would you consider doing this again in Advent? And if you did, what would be some of the films you might pull together for movies at Advent?
Yeah, as I mentioned, Children of Men would fit for Advent as well. Again, there are some of the stories directly the biblical narratives on screen, but to be honest, some of them are cheesy and inaccurate. So I'm not a huge fan of Christian films sometimes because it's just preaching to the choir, and oftentimes the performances aren't anywhere near Scorsese quality. But I'm thinking of even two films that I watched this year, two probably my two favorite films this year, because basically when you think about Advent, films that would specifically examine themes of waiting or persevering, leading to some newfound sense of joy and peace, right? Adventus, waiting, that's what Advent is all about. So actually my two favorite films from this year sort of fit that description. I don't know if you've seen these films, maybe some others have. I'm just going to throw these names out there. When we're done here today, I'm actually going to my movie theater to see this one for a second time. It's called Sound of Metal. And I don't know if you've heard of that one, Eric, but it's a story about a heavy metal drummer who loses his hearing, and he has to adapt and adjust to the trauma and the disorientation of life being deaf. And I don't want to spoil the film.
This isn't the true story of AC/DC, is it?
Yeah, it sounds strangely familiar, doesn't it? Yeah. But the lead character's name is Ruben, and he actually goes to a deaf community, and he gets some mentoring there, and he surrounds himself with a community of people who help him, give him a new sense of hope in the midst of this disorientation. And so he really has to persevere through it. And it's powerful performances. You're going to see some Oscar nominations for that movie in the next few weeks. I think that one would fit the theme of Advent. Another one, probably my favorite movie of the year, is called Minari. I talked about how I lived in Korea for a couple of years. Well, this is a true story. The director's sort of semi-autobiographical story of his family who had immigrated from Korea to California, but they relocate to rural Arkansas when the father has a dream of starting a farm and providing for his family. And you can imagine, in the 70s and 80s, living in rural Arkansas as Korean immigrants, some of the challenges that they would have bumped up against in the Bible Belt at that time. And so really, really powerfully explores the family dynamics of the need to persevere and as a family, going through the friction of a family, the friction of the community, coming together to find some hope and some sense of joy and peace. So those are probably the two films from this year that I would put on that list. What about you? Do you have any Advent ones that come to mind? Or? Advent's a little tougher for me than Lent, I think.
I think it's a little tougher for both of us because North America, when it comes to Christmas, is so commercialized.
Right.
And so it's very hard to find an Advent type.
I mean, It's a Wonderful Life, some of the classic Christmas stories, perhaps. I mean, yeah.
Yeah, I know there was one film a couple of years ago with Martin Sheen, and it was when he did the El Camino, and he journeyed on the El Camino. And
yes.
Connecting.
Yes.
I'm trying to think of what that was called.
Oh.
But I was thinking that film might actually fit well in an Advent theme because we're talking about taking the journey, Mary and Joseph taking the journey.
It's called The Way. It's called The Way.
Yes, yeah. Yes. So he takes his journey through the El Camino and finds these deep.
Directed by Mighty Ducks himself, Emilio Estevez.
Yes, a father-son duo. So I think that might be a good one. And then there's this kind of profound wake up at the end when they. Have you seen it? Or
not. Like I said, it's been recommended to me from someone else, and it's on my short list to watch. So
Okay, yeah.
maybe I'll tuck
Then
it
I
away
won't
until Advent and watch it then.
I won't spoil it for you then, but it was actually really well done, and I think it connects to that Advent theme. So
That's on my bucket list, is to walk that maybe on my next sabbatical if we're allowed to travel by then. But yeah, my mother-in-law recently did that walk and was sharing some of her experiences. Pretty profound.
yeah, yeah. Well, maybe in a different stream, I might ask you a question of how else you are maybe experiencing the season of Lent this year.
Yeah. So aside from the movies for Lent, my faith community, where we've been walking through, talking about story, we've been walking through the grand story of Scripture together for the last over a year, or since over a year ago, and that's been kind of neat to unfold the whole story of Scripture, not in an 8-week sermon series, but just not in a hurry, literally 16 months, just seeing all the connection points. And as we go through Lent together as a faith community, even though we're still sort of distant and disconnected, I think it'll add a level of sacredness, the fact that we've gone on this journey together, and it really will frame the cross in a different light, having intentionally gone through everything leading up to the cross and the unfolding of God's love and God's revelation. To see that, I think we always see it, but I think hopefully we'll see it in a new light, that the cross is not disconnected from the rest of the story. It really is like a good movie. It's the climax and the culmination. And one thing I've been really thinking of is, again, connecting to movies, is how the coming of Christ and the crucifixion, it reframes everything that's come before, like the ending of the Book of Eli you mentioned, or A Sixth Sense, or some of those movies with a big twist at the end. It's like, how did I not see that coming? And then you rewatch the movie again, it's like, oh yeah, that makes sense now, right? And so I've been seeing sort of the journey to the cross in the same light, that the gospel is not disconnected from the story of Israel, but it's just sort of the continuation, the culmination, and a radical sort of reframe and turning things upside down and what Jesus comes to do. So, and that's not a new revelation to me, but I think I'm a little more focused on that now, having been walking through that as a faith community for the last year.
Yeah, I can definitely identify with you there. I know, as we were talking earlier about the iconography that it's putting on, and I think when it comes to Lent, I often very much focus throughout it as it builds up to Good Friday. Mm-hmm. And for me, most people who know me know this, Good Friday is far more significant to me personally in my spiritual walk than Resurrection Sunday. I know they're connected and they're one and the same. They're a whole. They're a whole experience together. They're a whole event.
Yeah.
But for me, Good Friday has always been significant. And the reason why is because most people seem to think that it's Jesus being put up on the cross, when in reality, we're recognizing that it's Jesus putting on the cross, that he's taking on the cross and being raised up, as scripture talks about that.
No one takes my life from me, right? I give it. Yeah.
And it's really, it's not a depressive moment. It's not meant to be a depressive moment so much as it is the crowning moment. It's Jesus's crowning moment of becoming the Son of God, the salvation, the one who delivers creation from the brokenness that it is, and overcomes death in that experience. And I think that is, for me, that is what Lent and the build-up and the reflection is about, is how we are also called to take up our cross and follow him.
Right. We've been on this grand story journey. We're in the book of Acts right now. And I've just been so fascinated by hearing some of the early sermons from the early church and how they preached the gospel. It was all right, you killed Jesus, but God has raised him. Right? It's not angry God killed his son, but no, you killed Jesus. He submitted to the full force of your evil, and yet he sort of absorbed it all and recycled it into love and forgiveness. And that is his crowning moment, right? And it's always a mixture of emotions in Lent, and certainly Good Friday, right? Because we see the worst of humanity, we see the worst of the principalities and powers, the full force of it. As Paul says, where sin abounds, how much more does grace abound, right? But the last word is, Father, forgive them; they don't know what they do. It is finished. So, yeah.
I'm excited, as I'm going to be sitting down for a series I'm doing here on the Inception of Wonder on March 2nd with Rabbi Mark Glickman here in Calgary. And we're kind of like you, following that whole biblical narrative, but we're going to talk about the understanding of creation and how it leads into the fall, and the fall to redemption, and redemption to the eschaton. And we're going to have this kind of 4-part series discussing that as a Christian and as a Jew together. So that's going to be
exciting. I'm looking forward to that. I'll definitely be tracking along.
Yeah, it'll be good. So, well, Jason, this has been very cool. Thank you for chatting with me. Tell me if people want to learn more about Movies for Lent, as well as your YouTube channel and what you're creating and what you're about, how can they find out more and get a hold of you?
Yeah, probably the easiest way, you can find me on my personal Facebook page. I'm not big on Twitter, Instagram. I'm just a Facebook guy. You can find my personal Facebook page. You can find my YouTube channel. Just simply go to YouTube and search Tripp Advisor. Make sure you add that second P. You'll search and it'll default to Tripp Advisor with 1 P, and say, no, I want Tripp Advisor with 2 Ps. And then you'll find my channel there. The email related as well is Tripp Advisor, again with 2 Ps, Tripp Advisor 78. Good year to be born. TripAdvisor78 at gmail.com. And also the group that we're going to be pulling from for this Movies for Lent primarily is from a Theology on Tap group that I run. And we've been doing monthly gatherings or virtual gatherings. So you can even find on Facebook, there's a group, Theology on Tap Sudbury community where we are, and there's some information there as well. So shoot me an email, though. I'd love it if you'd love to just start your own group. If you're listening and you're inspired to do some Movies for Lent on all the movies we've shared or other ones, and you want some guidance, I'd be happy to sort of give people some guidance and get them running with it throughout Lent.
That sounds like a great future podcast for you to start up, Theology on Tap. So
yeah, there we go.
That's great. Jason, thanks so much.
Thanks, Eric. I really appreciate the invitation and love your podcast, and looking forward to creating some beauty together.
Awesome.
Well, that's a wrap. Thanks again to Erik for reaching out to me, and I really enjoyed that conversation we had. Do check him out. Check out his podcast over at the inceptionofwonder.com. He's curating some awesome conversations about faith and films and other topics across Canada. So give it a look. As always, thanks for taking time to be with me on this Friday. I'll be back again next Friday with another film review. Of course, I'll be hanging out with you too if you'd like to follow along on Tuesdays and Thursdays on my Tabletop Tuesday videos, as well as my Theology Thursday videos here at TripAdvisor as well. So as always, feel free to like, share, subscribe to the channel, click the notification bell, and get notified whenever I produce a new video here at TripAdvisor. And so whatever you're watching through this season of Lent, or whatever you're watching tonight or this weekend, I hope it'll be an enjoyable time. Grab your popcorn, grab some loved ones, and enjoy. We'll see you next time here at TripAdvisor.